This project is a Beseem Be Safe wristband or armband, depending on the length that you actually make the band itself. It's got a circuit that is joined with a popper, so when we open the popper the LED switches off. When we close the popper it joins the circuit and switches the LED on. The band's made of high visibility reflective material with the LED light being added as an extra safety feature. It could be used by cyclists, by walkers, or basically anybody who wants a high-vis safety product. The design could be adapted to make it longer. This is a wristband to make it into a longer armband to go across the upper arm. The LED is inserted into the fabric using a metal eyelet. This adds quite a nice finishing touch to the armband, but it also strengthens the hole. On a lot of fabrics, using an eyelet like this will stop the area around the hole from fraying, which is quite important. This fabric won't fray, but lots of other fabrics will, so the use of an eyelet is a good way of stopping that from happening. This project uses a standard cell holder with a cell, and a standard 5mm LED. In this particular one, it's a red flashing LED. Also got some conductive thread and some ordinary sewing thread for holding our fabrics together. And then we've got two different types of reflective tape. You see the fluorescent reflective tape and also the silver reflective tape. So this one's fabric backed and this one's more sort of plasticky sort of feeling. We've also got an ordinary sewing popper, quite a big sort of size, and a metal eyelet that we're going to attach to our fabric, and which the LED will go through. So this needs to be big enough to allow the bulb on the LED to pop through the eyelet. The length of your fabrics will depend on whether you're going to use it as an armband or a wristband. Basically you want this length here to go around the area, the wrist or the arm that it's going to be worn on, plus about 4 centimetres or so to allow for these two ends to be overlapped. This is going to go on the inside of the armband, so this will be what the circuit is going to be attached to. This needs to be the same length and width as the main part of the fabric. These two pieces here will be the backing and they'll be sewn together, so they need to be about half the width of this main fabric piece, plus about ½ centimetre to allow you to sew it together. The first step is to attach a metal eyelet about 6 centimetres away from the bottom edge. You'll need to do this using the manufacturer's instructions. You're then going to take your inner reflective tape, your inner layer, and make a small hole, same position as before, so about 6 centimetres from the top, because this is where the LED is going to sit. It will sit going through this hole and then going into the hole on the eyelet. Use round nose pliers just to twist the negative leg on the LED, and then just push the loop and the leg just to one side so it sits at right angles to the bulb. The LED is now slotted through the hole in the reflective tape, and notice it's the reflective side that we're poking it through, so it's going to actually come out on the other side. And what will actually happen is that this side is going to go through the eyelet that we made previously. So the stage that we do next is to stitch this twisted leg down using some conductive thread. So we're using small oversewing stitches to hold the looped leg down onto the fabric, making sure that as you do the stitches you put it nice and tight, making sure the no sort of baggy stitches as you work. Next we're going to position the cell holder, so it's about 1 centimetre or so below where the stitches are on the LED, just as little running stitches that just take the thread across to where the silver hole is. So this one here is just a hole that's just going to be stitched down just to hold the cell holder down so it doesn't flap. This one, with the silver ring, is the one that we want. This is the one we want our conductive thread to be attached to. So here you can see that our negative leg has been stitched down with oversewing stitches, and the conductive thread travels straight along to the negative part of the cell holder. So our negative side of our circuit has now been completed. We now use the round nose pliers to twist the positive leg into a small loop, same as before, and flatten that onto the surface of our reflective tape. We're now going to stitch that down using an oversewn stitches, just the same as we've done over here. So now the positive leg is stitched down using oversewn stitches. Notice this length of thread is a different one to the one that I used here. So this was tied off and a new piece of thread started. What we're going to do now is attach the popper to this section here, so about 1 centimetre or so below the top edge of the reflective fabric. I'm just going to do some running stitches to get to that point, and then oversew the popper into place along each of the 4 points on the popper. So here you can see my little running stitches that are going from the positive leg up to the popper. I've already sewn some of the sections of the popper down, just on this last hole, just to do some oversewn stitches again, just to hold this side of the popper into position. So we've got our negative side of our circuit complete and part of our positive circuit complete. So we're going to work on this other side now to complete the remaining side of the positive circuit. The positive side of the cell holder has been stitched down here using oversewing stitches, and just doing some running stitches to take the conductive thread up to the top end of the band, so to around sort of 2 centimetres below this sort of top edge is where I'm going to stop. So here is where the popper is going to be positioned, but it's not going to go on this layer of fabric, it's going to go on the layer of reflective fabric that's on the right side. So what we're going to need to do is to pop the LED into the eyelet hole that we made earlier on, and hold these layers together, and we're going to actually stitch the popper onto this side, onto the yellow reflective fabric on the outside. Now often these pieces of fabric will move around, so it can be quite useful just use a glue stick and just a very light layer just to hold these in position while you do the next stage. Take the needle all the way through the layers, so both layers of tape onto the right side, and just as we've done before, I'm just going to oversew the other side of the popper into position. Be a little bit stiffer because you've got quite a thick layer of sort of plasticky sort of type fabric, as well as the reflective tape as well. You're going to do oversewn stitches over all 4 of the holes in the same way as before, pulling your thread nice and tight in the same way as before. The popper's now sewn down. We've still got loose layers. This is still not stitched onto the front fabric. What we can do now, before we go any further and stitch it all together, is just to test that the circuit actually works. So I'll put a battery inside the cell holder. What's going to happen is we're just going to join the popper at this end, the one we sewed first, to the popper that's on the right side of the fabric. When we close the popper, it closes the circuit, which switches on the LED, and when we open the popper, it breaks the circuit and switches it off again. So we know that the circuit is correct now. Now I'm going to cover all of this inside with some more of the reflective tape. So I'm going to put a top section onto here. So I've already stitched together the 2 narrow strips. So just use a sewing machine to hold these 2 layers together. And I've left a hole, quite a big hole, because we need to be able to access this battery area in order to be able to change it. So this is going to sit on the surface to cover up the inside of the circuit. Notice we're going to leave this top edge open so that we can see this popper. So what I'm going to do now is just to machine all of this together around the outside edge. The backing fabric's now stitched in place, and you can see the gap here where we can change the battery should we need to access it. Just one point, when you're stitching it together, you might find it quite useful to use a zip foot, because that will allow you to avoid some of these bulky areas where your battery is and where your popper is at each end, and your LED that's in the centre here. Just one final point, just notice that here's the popper that we stitched to start off with, and that is on the original layer, the inner layer, that is the layer that we did your circuit on. So that bit is the only bit of the original layer of fabric that we can see. That's why this section here is cut 2 centimetres shorter, and just as that allows us to have that popper so that we can attach it to the other end, and there you can see our lights flashing as the circuit's been joined.